Welcome to the Research Works podcast, live from the European Academy of Childhood Disability Conference 2024 in Bruges, Belgium. Join us for interviews with keynote speakers, world-renowned researchers and clinicians, and behind-the-scenes stories from one of the great paediatric conferences in the world.
Well, this is episode 25 of EACD in Bruges, and this is our final episode here. I have had the best time throughout this entire conference speaking to some really incredible people from all different walks of life, whether they're clinicians or researchers from all different parts of the world. It's just so wonderful to be at a conference where the heart of this entire conference has been about collaboration and impact generation. Both of these terminologies are just so incredible when you think about what they mean in research, in clinical practice, and when you look at the themes of the research that have been coming through this conference. I feel really excited. I feel incredibly excited to see where research is headed and where clinical practice may be headed. There were a lot of keynote speakers at this particular conference that were incredibly thought-provoking, making us stop to think about what we're doing and challenging us to think about new ways. And the best thing about being evidence-based is that if you're always on the cusp of current knowledge and you're teachable and you want to learn, it's just so easy to move along with it because it's so interesting, because everything is building on each other. And I have found myself in awe of where research currently is at. I've been doing this for a few years now, and we've recorded over 140 episodes, and we've just been talking to people time and time again, and I can see that we're building on each other's work, and it's actually really exciting where it's headed. So I thought I'd give a bit of a rundown about my observations from this conference, a summary, I suppose, of the topics I've been talking to people about, the keynotes, and hopefully that will help you to sort of maybe hone in on some areas that you want to listen to as well. I mean, personally, I would listen to every single episode because they were all brilliant. They were all great. But before I get into all of that, I do want to make sure I give a huge shout out to the organizing committee here at EACD. And the actual concert hall itself. The staff here have been incredible. They have welcomed us in. The conference committee members were all completely on board with having us here. In fact, really worked hard to make sure we had the right space here at the conference. That was really cool. And for us to be able to integrate this podcast seamlessly into this conference really again speaks to the heart and the nature of the conference committee. So a huge congratulations to them for what you have done here. And I really want to shout out to Ed, our producer. He's been wearing an orange shirt that actually says Producer Ed. So you can't miss him here at the conference. And what has been really funny is everyone has been coming up to him, commenting about how much they love his voice and how much they love what he does. And his head has gotten so big, I'm not entirely sure we'll get him out of the studio, but he's threatening a spin-off show. So who knows? Who knows what will happen from that? But all jokes aside, we can't do these things without Ed. He brought all of this equipment through his suitcase and luggage and train, and this stuff is not light because we wanted to have the right equipment here so that the experience is still amazing. So incredibly grateful to you, Ed, and missing you, Ash. Of course, people have been asking about you, and the minute I say, look, she's a mother of 3 under 5, everyone really does get it. We're all thinking about you from here, and we can't wait to have you back on tour with us as well. But I hope you've been enjoying these episodes too. Okay, so let's get into some of these topics. Now, the entire theme of this conference, it has been around this idea of a symphony. And that is just so great. As a musical person, I just love that. I think of all sorts of things, including maybe Bittersweet Symphony, which has been playing on loop in my head for some reason. But I'm just that kind of person. A word just triggers off a thought and there I go. But when you think about a symphony, it's all about collaboration, right? You can't have different parts of the ensemble playing whatever they want to. The timpani definitely needs to be doing what they need to be doing. You've got the string section. You've got all the wind instruments, and hopefully you have the most important pianist right in the middle of all of it as well, because that's the most important instrument. FYI, I'm a pianist, hence the bias. But then you also have a conductor, and the conductor doesn't do all of it. It just keeps everyone in time with a direction and a vision to get through the piece. And I really do see the chair of the scientific committee, Professor Bernard Dan, as that conductor. Now, I think he'd squirm if he heard me say that to him directly. But it's really true. And if you listen to the episode I speak with him about his vision and where he thinks research is headed, you can see that this man really is thinking forward. He's been very progressive in our thinking. And the collaboration that he's talking about isn't just the collaboration between us and our disciplines. That seems really obvious, and that's a basic now. That is not something that we need to argue about or debate about. We should be working within our disciplines, within health. We're not even talking just about involving consumers. I feel like that's become so integrated into what we do now. Even so, if you were submitting an abstract to present here at the conference, you had to demonstrate how you involved consumers. In fact, having a consumer on your authorship group was highly desirable. And that really signals a change. But he's not even just talking about that. Professor Bernard Dan is talking about collaboration even outside of our area, outside of health. And he demonstrated this by actually going outside of health for keynote speakers. You know, our first keynote interview was with Sally Lynch from Dublin and Catherine and Alex Haslam from University of Queensland. Now, as a clinical geneticist, a neuropsychologist, and a social and organisational psychologist, what do they have to do with this area? And when he brought them together, even they were saying, we weren't sure how this is going to work. But as they started to talk about their areas of interest, they brought together these unique perspectives from their areas where it's very well consolidated knowledge, but innovative in the sense of bringing it into health. And without us really realizing, as healthcare professionals in childhood disability, we are in a little bubble almost, and it's a lovely, cozy, warm bubble. It's lovely, but we need to be challenged with our thoughts. And there's expertise out there that is beyond what we are often exposed to. Take Mika de Ketelaere, for example. She's talking about AI, the good, the bad, and the ugly. Now, she comes out of our industry, outside of our industry, I should say. And we need to speak to people like that because they're the people who know more about AI than we do as healthcare professionals. We're not keeping up with the area of literature. Yet AI is in our world. It is available, freely available. We know this is how consumers are accessing information as well. Therefore, we need to know about that too. So we can't possibly be experts in all of it, but we do need to engage with these incredible people outside of our industry. Talking about working outside of our discipline as well, I spoke to Professor Rick Lieber from the Shirley Ryan Ability Lab, and everyone knows that name. It's a well-known name. We spoke to Sudarshan Dayanidhi last year, also from the same lab, and they look at muscle, but not just muscle. They go deep into muscle, right? They look at the cells, not even just the sarcomeres. They're looking at the mitochondria. Like, they go deep. And they're really trying to understand why muscle is so different in cerebral palsy. And as cell biologists, they have found that maybe we need to look at it in a completely different way. If children with cerebral palsy have muscle that is actually different right from the onset, it might not just be about activity. And Rick was talking about the fact that if muscle only has a certain capacity in cerebral palsy, we can push and push and push, do as much strengthening as we can, but there is a limit. There is a ceiling effect of what that muscle is actually capable of doing from a microbiology perspective. And so they went outside of the area and actually found a drug that's used in blood cancer and have found that that has an effect on the growth of the cells, which then enables the muscle to grow. Now, that is a game changer. And they're thinking this research study will be complete in the next few years. So if this is found to be effective, who knows where that will head? What's the potential then of strengthening muscles for our children? That comes right down to the level where we are at as clinicians and we're working with our patients. So this kind of work has really come from looking outside of our discipline. And that was something that really stood out in this conference. So collaboration, a big one. The other big one was technology. Now, I briefly spoke about AI, and AI is here to stay, as Mika had described in her keynote lecture. And we just need to understand the parameters of AI. And after actually we finished the podcast, which often does happen, we switch the microphones off, we sit here and we keep chatting. I go, oh, I wish we recorded that because so many great conversations came from that. And I was talking to her about the use of ChatGPT and how you can use that as researchers to clean your data, making sure it's all de-identified, how you can really use it to assist with that. But then she was talking about the dark side of it that we need to be aware of, because this technology's come on, it's very new, but the safety checks might not always be in the front of our minds. So really encourage you to listen to that one, because I think we all need to be aware of it. But once we're aware of that, we can use AI in such a wonderfully positive way too. And this really links to some of the things that I was hearing about this conference. We, as in me, presented about a learning healthcare system, about using digital platforms and data platforms to learn from the data, using generative AI for large language models to ask it a question within a very safe space to get an answer from the system, something that's really dynamic. That's really exciting. And then there's also all the different kind of registers that are around the world that have been able to give such rich information that you can't just get from an RCT, of course, but when you have these amazing databases that are as old as the one in Western Sweden from 1950s, you now have incredible information that gives longitudinal data. And from that, we were able to learn about causal pathways for cerebral palsy. That was an incredible conversation with Gia and Sarah McIntyre. There was also the conversation about how we can look at dyskinesia, the prevalence and the background, and that was Kate Himmelman, and she was talking about that from that register as well, and there's just a great wealth of information there too in terms of its prevalence. Magnus Pullman uses that register to help us to understand about intellectual disability in children with cerebral palsy, and he was able to see that that's related or there's at least it's associated with CFCS, communication, and epilepsy. So those could be markers of really flagging, looking at reassessment for intellectual disability. And then there was also predictive risk for respiratory. So the data that's used in Australia that Natasha Baer presented, again, linked data to get this wealth of information for a predictive tool. So really answering some important questions. And one that we've never spoken to anyone about before was about saliva control. And Charlie Fairhurst spoke about that from the UK. And he had actually set up a drooling clinic, a saliva control clinic in the UK. And so as a result, they've been collecting data for the last 20 years, and they've been able to identify the different kind of interventions and assessments to really develop clinical care pathways. So we're really seeing the use of these digital data platforms used in such a wonderful way to inform clinical practice, because they're really real life clinical trials in a way, and we can learn so much from that. And that led to the next topic of methodologies. And there really are some beautifully robust methodologies. Bernard Dan was saying this as well about qualitative methodologies becoming more to the forefront, but not just because we didn't recognize it before, but methodologies like that are more robust. People understand how to do them now. And so you're not just getting quantitative data, you're getting this beautiful qualitative data that comes alongside it. But he also spoke about adaptive clinical trials. I'm loving that. And he said the same thing. It's kind of like a buzz at the moment, because it allows you to adapt to, maybe fast responders and slow responders. You're not waiting for an entire RCT to be complete to get the result. This allows you to follow what could look like in clinical practice. So that's been really proposed and put forward. In fact, there's a whole network, a global network. We spoke to Anina Ridderban Rosenbaum about it. There is this whole global network that's starting to look at these adaptive clinical trials and clinical databases. So that was really cool. And I guess the next real big theme was around impact generation or impact creation. And I spoke to Marco Conians just last night at the dinner, and he was saying, look, I feel like I can't say impact anymore because that's all I've been saying. But at the end of the day, what we're here for, the reason you and I are here listening to this podcast or creating this podcast is because we want to have some sort of impact. And what really struck me about that was what Alex Haslam said. And he said, look, disability can divide, but it can also unite and create a platform full of possibilities. It could be societally curative. And I love the idea of being able to champion causes, bringing people together like we have at this conference, but thinking outside of the box, whether that comes to different methodologies of mobility, and recognizing that each individual as a social being. And that's come up a lot in this conference as well. And it shouldn't be a surprise, but sometimes you just need to stop and hear someone say that. With each individual being viewed as a social being, that means we need to think about their communication. And we've seen beautiful technology being demonstrated here. In the experience room, for example, both high-tech and low-tech AAC. And we know communication, not only is it a human right, but as Magnus Polman was saying, is the fact that it's related to intellectual disability. His speech pathologists are saying, it's probably when you think about their communication, the reason why that's a marker is because that reciprocal form of communication, that expressive ability is often not always fostered. And every setting needs to be thinking about how a child communicates. And that's nothing new, but goodness me, when you view someone as a social being and why that's so important, there's a bit more of an urgency about it. And the fact that we're looking at human rights now, again, we're looking outside of just the ICF, right? We're looking at other models. We're looking at a sustainability model. We're looking at human rights. We're looking at the societal impact. And when we view mobility and communication and play all of these factors of being a human right, then things like, is crying okay in therapy? They're really easy questions to answer. And I spoke about this with Sarah Reedman, and we started this conversation a year or so ago about, is crying acceptable? Because we've been seeing a lot of this online, and again, usually it comes from a place of good intent, but our methodology and approach and interpretation of the situation probably needs to be challenged, and it's okay to challenge them. If a child is crying during therapy, we have to ask ourselves the question of, what are we hoping to achieve here? And for a child to cry during therapy tells you that they're in some level of distress. It's not, as I saw in a post, not them complaining that they would rather be relaxing. It's because they're trying to communicate something with you. So crying just simply means we need to stop, we need to have a conversation, and we need to investigate. Because if we don't do that, we are saying that that voice doesn't matter. And from a human rights perspective, that's clearly unacceptable. And so that conversation was a great conversation, just between two colleagues, therapists that work in the field all the time. It's simply not worth the trade-off. You don't push through therapy because you want to maximize the first 1,000 days. We all know about early intervention being important. But if we disrupt that relationship, not just with us as therapists, but between the child and their parents, that has significant ramifications in the long term. And we're talking about medical trauma. These are real issues. And we know that we can work on a lot of beautiful things like participation and strength and motor learning skills well and truly into childhood, adolescence, and adulthood. So the time is not lost. Rather enjoy the journey. Rather just make sure that we're valuing these relationships, and that is absolutely okay, because we have, as we've heard, these great interventions that are available with really exciting outcomes for our children, whether it's frame running, whether it's learning a new motor skill. I spoke to Atafe and Brian Hoare about the upper limb motor learning strategy tool. I've got the right order of that. And that really is a manual that helps therapists to integrate motor learning principles into all of their practice with self-reflection. And I love that they've done this, because a question I often hear is, how do I actually implement these evidence-based tools into my practice? Like, no one's really teaching me that. I'm reading about it, but how do I do it? And this really addresses that. And the main thing from all of this that Brian was talking about is, we want children to enjoy this process, but they can learn. Look at our feedback and how we're providing that feedback and seeing ourselves as a coach. if you're coaching someone, you're not constantly on them, but you're providing them with feedback at the right time for them to gain new skills. And if we can refine skills as people, as teenagers and adults, and so can our children, we just need to know the right methods. We need to break it down a little bit more. So this gives us the possibility to provide these interventions. Again, there's a lot of great things that are available for our kids. We can see them achieve their goals. So we don't need to be so fixated and being so concerned that we're willing to push through crying in the early days on the hope that that will get us to a better outcome, when really what you're replacing it with is something that will really come to bite you later on. So a good thought I had around for therapists as well as this is when we're talking about, when Alex Haslam said disability has the possibility to divide, he's talking about, families and when a family is faced with a diagnosis or a disability, it's got a potential to take them away from their community that they already know. And I was reflecting on that for us as therapists, and we need to just make sure that we're always in community. And it sounds so obvious, but there are a lot of soul practitioners out there. There's a lot of people that have a vision of wanting to help people, and sometimes being on your own can mean that you don't have a great network to have these conversations with and be challenged by. And it's a good question about who do we talk to, who are we surrounding ourselves with, and really prioritizing opportunities to make sure we see people. And sometimes it can be online to have those conversations. And we know we have Zoom and we have all these methodologies now, so we should use them. But we can't do this by ourselves. And Paula Shagger said this, and she goes, my 20 years of being a professor, you just can't do these things on your own. You can't answer these questions. And we need to make sure that we are finding these groups that we can work with, whether you're a researcher, absolutely, because you cannot do impactful research on your own. You just simply can't. And as a clinician, there's only so far you can go before there's burnout. There's no sustainability there. And from an organizational, psychological perspective, you need to be making sure you're connected with people to grow yourself as a therapist, but also as a leader. And I would like to say that I guess my thought for researchers is what Martin Goff and Adam Shortland said in their keynote yesterday. And it was really about taking a moment to stop and reflect. And Martin really presented a new concept. So it's not even a hypothesis yet, it's a concept of what happens when it comes to protecting the brain at birth, because it consumes so much energy. So if all the energy has been directed to protecting the brain, then muscles really aren't needed for survival. So is that why? Possibly why our muscles look different in children with cerebral palsy right from the early onset? Is that why? And it really was something that made you stop to think about it. And again, he came at it from a very different perspective. And he said, if anything, if we just stop to think about it, it's going to be a fantastic way to think about new ideas, because again, we can get caught in this silo, and Adam really challenged us on that. So taking a moment to reflect is so important. And I know as researchers, we have so much work to do, data to collect, grants to fulfill. And sometimes a moment sounds like a little bit too luxurious, but if we don't take those moments, we can keep running on something and miss something that will be completely in front of us about a new idea to go for. So it seems to me that there's a lot of things that are on the cusp of something great. And I loved hearing about the advances in epilepsy, personalized nutrition and medicine and surgical options. I said before about muscle, digital platforms, collaborative platforms for research. Gosh, it is very exciting. And I think there's so much more to cover, so much more to talk about. And my huge take home from this conference is we want to always be thinking about these two things, just collaboration. Always think about how we can collaborate in a really meaningful, authentic, and rich way, whether we're clinicians or researchers. And how can we generate impact in every part of what we do? No longer is it okay just to write an article and think that article is the end. It is simply the means. The end is the impact generation, impact creation, getting to that point where we're actually seeing lives affected, moving the needle from advancements in clinical care and knowledge. And if we can be guided by those two things, I think it's really exciting, and it compels me to move forward. And for the podcast itself, I think we are in a privileged position to constantly be talking to people who are on the cusp of these new discoveries. And I know I've been really challenged by it, but inspired by it. And I hope you've enjoyed this journey with me. As you can hear as the podcast is going, my voice is most certainly deteriorating. I would say one thing about these conferences is these Europeans definitely know how to party. Last night they had their party and there was a rock band playing music from the 90s and the early noughties, things I have not heard for a long time. There was Bon Jovi and there was Nirvana. And anyway, there was a lot of singing and dancing is all I can say. And it went pretty hard. But again, we're all just people. And it was just a great opportunity to network and enjoy life. It is truly a journey. We're not in a race to get anywhere, but we have certain topics that I think are really urgent. And when we view everything that we do from the lens of human rights, whether it's education, play, mobility, and communication, we're heading in the right direction, and it's a really good start. So thank you so much for tuning in. Thank you for your support. We've seen the numbers, my goodness, like it's thousands and thousands of people that tune into this, and that just makes it all worthwhile. And as I've had to explain to a lot of people here who don't quite know why we do what we do, we do this because we really want to share knowledge. People always think it's amazing that we don't have a sponsor, and it's something that I've spoken really openly about. Like we don't have a financial sponsor because we don't want ever to be clouded by being paid for something, which is why this person is on. That doesn't happen. It's completely transparent. The work that's been put on here is the recognition of an area, its reputation, and it's to have a conversation. And we're just really grateful that the Healthy Strides Foundation, which is where we're from, provides the resources for us to have these cameras and the ability to upload all of this on there, because it's part of the core business. We just really truly believe that as part of research work that we do ourselves is that we help to spread the word of research. So it's an incredible privilege. Thank you for tuning in. It makes it all so worthwhile. I must admit, we'll probably have a break for a few weeks, but they'll give you an opportunity to catch up on all the 25 episodes we've put out. And the next thing to really look forward to is we will be at ACPDM in Cairns in Queensland, Australia in July. So it's really not far away. We will interview a whole host of people there as well. So this conference experience continues, and I hope that you can join us for that as well. But for now, thank you so very much for tuning in, and I'll talk to you all again really soon. Bye.